To should, need to, must. So when we're tempted to use these words, consider using the word may. For example, instead of saying, you should put your work away, you may say, you may put your work away. And you might have noticed how I did that. So consider asking a question. Instead of saying you ought to put your work away, you might say, do you think it's a good idea to put your work away when you're done so everyone can have a nice organized room to be in? And we'll see this is a particular category of a way of phrasing a question, which starts with, in our home, we. So only the questions, though, that are non-judgmental will have power. If there's an implied judgment, through your tone of voice, through your body language, through your spoken word, it will have the same effect as using need to, must, should, ought to. And snark, not so much, maybe. Don't you think it's a good idea to put your work away so when you're done, so we're not living in a pigsty here, stuff like that? Some kids might find that funny. So parents will achieve best results when using a calm, respectful voice. And even when the negotiations are non-negotiable, especially when negotiations are really not what you're planning on getting into. Montessori also recommends speaking with the child only after establishing eye contact. And the type of eye contact that she's talking about is important because it's only when both sets of eyes are at the same level. It doesn't work if you're standing above or below the child. And bending at the waist to get at the same level doesn't show that same level of respect. Montessori is all about respect. Respect for your child, yourself, your family, the environment, you name it. It's about respect for everything in our world. The volume in your voice makes a difference too. Kids are used to adults speaking loudly. When a parent first uses a low volume voice, it's a bit of a surprise. It gets attention, and even when the voice is firm, it does tend to promote your child's attentiveness or responsiveness. Now there is a common pattern in today's speech. It's called uptalk. You guys might be familiar with this. I'm doing it now. It's pretty annoying. And with a downward sound. No uptalk. Uptalk doesn't command respect. It will not get child's attention or even another person's attention. And finally, with the Montessori approach, it's helping them grow as they are developmentally ready. Key phrase, they're developmentally ready. We don't want them driving a car when they're 13 without supervision. But they can certainly drive a car when they're 15 with supervision. It's all about, are they ready for that? And that term, developmentally ready, is one we use a lot with ShillerLearning. So for example, when a child can read on their own, as an example, our curriculum is what we call open and go. It's scripted. So what happens is there'll be a 6 or 7 year old who's used to having their mom or dad read the instructions of the lesson to them, and they'll say, hey Mom, I see you're reading from the book, I can read. And it's a great opportunity because now they're developmentally ready to actually start self-instruction and be able to work by themselves. And you're always available for help, of course. Imagine how empowered a child's going to feel when they can then read on their own and do what Mom's or Dad's been doing all this time. All right, so James, our marketing guru, taking a video here, posted a video on our Facebook page about the power of may. Now, I've been around Montessori types most of my life, so I have to admit, I was pretty close to being in shock when I started to read the comments that came in on this Facebook page. The comments are rolling in. I never had a supervisor tell me, I may do anything. Not real life. Sorry. No flipping way. As an educator, I learned to do the opposite, which may say something about educators, the way they're trained today. Yep, I tried it. They laughed at me so hard. Yeah, now what? I know a mom who does this. Her kids are the worst. This is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. So these are some of the comments we got back. Poor James, watch this. We've gotten over 100,000 views, and I picked out the snarkiest of comments, of course. Most of the comments were positive. But this is a common attitude when we talk about having respect for our kids and let them make developmentally appropriate choices. So, other comments though, did give me some hope. What's the next step? They gave some suggestions about language. I won't read all of these. And there was a lot of talk about, I don't want to be permissive with my kids. I think an authoritarian approach is better. And so I wanted to be careful not to frame the conversation that way. It's not about being permissive versus being authoritarian. It's an approach where kids have freedom and responsibility. Within clear, consistent, and of course developmentally appropriate limits. Let's go back here. I mentioned respect, there's compassion, empathy, and support. And that's what Montessori is all about as we guide our children. So in fairness and with empathy towards those whose comments were well incredulous, we are looking at putting on a subsequent video which will talk about the consequences of inappropriate behavior. And but the language that we use is a topic that we're going to cover throughout this talk today. So let's talk about the principled Montessori approach. I've been talking about tactics, the tone of voice to use, eye level, good words to use like may, body language. And what does this behavior derive from, right? It derives from principles like everything else. And if we look at the way the school system is set up, and even the way a lot of curriculum that you're being exposed to is set up, it's about knowledge. Like, what does my kid know? Do they know something? And that's kind of our measure, our metric for whether or not kids are doing well. And I propose that that emphasis is misguided. And if we start instead, picture an alternate universe where we start with the principles. What's important to us as people? What's important to us as parents? And start with that and have that conversation with our kids about what we value. Do we value always being right about something? Or do we value knowing the truth about something, even if it means that we're wrong or our way of thinking, not we're wrong, but our way of thinking was suboptimal? Having those principles then means, okay, well, what do we need to be able to do to be able to live in concert with our principles, which is another word for integrity. So, for example, if I can't tell if the statement is true or not, it's going to be hard for me to live with integrity with my value of valuing truth, thinking truth is important. So what do I need to do to get that ability? I have to have some knowledge. I have to know what a fallacy is. I have to then develop the ability to recognize that fallacy. Now I can live in concert with my principles. But you see how that's all, the knowledge is only driven by the principles we have and what abilities we need to live with integrity with those principles. So if you think of it as a pyramid of values, abilities, knowledge, the knowledge that we want is driven by our values and principles and abilities, not the other way around. And everything else here is, by and large, a lot of curriculum is driven towards the knowledge. So we turn that on its head. So let's start with the principles. Remember that they will model, your kids will model how you handle any situation. Goes around, comes around. It's a huge responsibility. Do as I say and not as I do is generally not a good recipe for success. It's not generally going to result in good outcomes. Another principle, be clear and consistent. It's not so easy with the ups and downs of parenting for homeschoolers, a bunch of kids running around. So a good start is to have a set of house rules. I put a sample set of house rules up here. So we're kind to each other because we love each other. I'm not going to read all these, but these are a set of 4 principles that I've used in my home. I've seen lots of reading about how other parents have set them up, their principles, pretty similar stuff. You can come up with your own. But these principles were actually set up with the children. They were part and parcel of coming up with these. And One of the things that's not here is stuff like you gotta make your bed, or no elbows on the table at dinner time, or sort of more tactical implementations of these things. And there's a reason for that. The other nice thing about having house rules, as we'll see, is that in our house so these are rules that we all follow, and kids, it's again a matter of respect, an intersection of a lot of Montessori concepts. So these rules are by and large high level. And they also have a great deal of power. Does anybody see a word that's common besides we? Which is a pretty important word. It's all inclusive. What other word is common to all these rules?
Taking care of each other.
So what was that? Because? Because, yeah, look at that. Because is in every single one of these things. There's a reason for that. There's a lot of power to the word because. In 1978, there was a Harvard Business School professor who, Ellen Langer, she published a research study on because. It's pretty interesting. She had study participants request cut a line of people. It's back in the 70s, so they had copy machines, so there's a bunch of students lining up to make copies for their schoolwork. And so she had some volunteers come in to deliberately ask if they could cut in line. And they phrased it 3 different ways, and they looked at the results. So one came up and said, "Excuse me, I have 5 pages to copy. May I use the copy machine?" Another said, "May I use the copy machine because I have to make copies?" It's pretty funny. It's like, no, because you're hungry. Like, why else would you want to use the copy machine? "Excuse me, I have 5 pages. Can I use the copy machine because I'm in a rush?" Like, oh, you're in a rush? Like, we're not. So anyway, which is kind of the snark thing we might be thinking about and not actually verbalize. But those are the 3 things that. Ways that they ask the question. So what do you think out of these, which worked best? Was it, may I use the copy machine, just a direct response?
Yeah.
Was it, may I use the copy machine because I have to make copies?
That's just dumb.
That's just dumb, right? It's like, duh, right? May I use the copy machine because I'm in a rush? So that might be a good reason. Like, at least you're given a reason. Like, okay, maybe not everybody's in a rush like I am. Like, I have to be in class in 3 minutes, and I'm going to flunk this if I don't get these copies made. Can I cut it and use the copy machine? So the results are actually pretty interesting of this, because my intuition might indicate, yeah, a straightforward request will work, or giving a good reason will work. Well, here's what it turned out to be.
Oh, really?
Isn't that interesting? So, first of all, by and large, the requests were granted. Over half the requests were granted. It's a huge difference between just, may I use the copy machine, without the word because. Once you use the word because, it doesn't really matter what you say after that. May I use the copy machine because it's Tuesday. Will work just as well as anything else. So, and look at the difference between a really silly reason and a fairly decent reason. There's basically no difference, 93, 94%. As long as you give a reason. Anyway, that's a little handy kind of trick or tip you can use if you want someone to do something, whether it's your child or your spouse or even yourself. But just put the word because at the end of it. You'll be surprised at the results. There's one thing that because, by the way, that will have an opposite effect. It wasn't part of this study, but if you say because I said so, you can expect that 60% to go way down. So that's the one exception to this rule. The reason is because the limit and the consequence are left undefined. There is no way to attach the consequence to the limit. So let's talk about what I mean by that. We're talking about getting buy-in, working together as a team, accomplishing something. So when we talk about the house rules, you can say, well, I came up with these because I think they're best for you and for me and for the whole family. Are these good rules? Why do you think they're good? This is the kind of conversation you can have with your kids about this, because we want to get established agreement to the greatest extent possible on values and principles. If we start there, such tremendous power in our household. Are we missing any house rules that you think we ought to have there that are missing? What a great question. Really gets them involved in the process. And finally, do you agree with these rules? Now we've worked through these rules, we've talked, we've negotiated. Do you think these are good rules? Do we all agree? I think they're good rules too, but do we all agree to live by them? Now, some people have reacted, at least online, never in person, thank goodness, but some people react aggressively and even angrily to the suggestions that I'm making right now. And I just find that fascinating. And I was just I'm not a psychologist, just trying to figure that out. Why would someone, have a negative reaction to these kind of things? And I guess it's really out of fear of losing control. So let's look at the key reason why this approach has worked so well for literally hundreds of millions of students who've used Montessori over the last century, and why research studies have actually shown statistically significant better results academically and socially from kids who've followed it and families who follow this. And the reason is there's another value to because it defines our value system. Our principles. Saying because means we have a reason. There's a principle that we all believe in together. And people like that, and children like that. They like to belong. When you expose your kids to the concept of principles and values from day one, both with how you interact with them and how they see you interact with others, again, modeling that behavior, they're going to follow your model. When they know and see that you care about having solid principles, solid values, it forms the most solid foundation and solid basis and foundation to tackle difficult solutions. So let's go back to these rules and distill the principles from these. And these are the because phrases. We're kind to each other because we love each other. We eat at the table because we want to be with each other. And the table is where we meet. We take care of things because we respect our environment. We use our words, not our fists, because we do not wish to cause each other harm. And we take care of each other. So look how much power these rules have. When your commitment to these principles that are focused on love and caring, when your commitment is strong, when it's clear, your kids will share that commitment. And life magically becomes better, and it really does. It's an amazing thing. So look, kids want to know, they need to know what's expected of them. And here we're setting those expectations. We're setting them at the highest level. So the flip side is when we don't state rules or principles clearly, or we don't even set them at all, when a parent's inconsistent in applying them, if we do have them, say when we don't notice, or we do notice but we don't bring it up when expectations are met, when principles are violated. So kids are going to get confused and they're going to develop mistrust. So it's not just a matter of having principles, it's a matter of really being observant, being self-aware of when these principles are not being observed. And when they are. And giving feedback on both those counts to children. That's going to be really effective. All right, so let's talk about James' next video on consequences after you say you may and kids don't. What happens when our principles aren't followed? What happens when expectations aren't met? By the way, let's say I'll come up with an example. So what are the Montessori principles we can follow? So one major Montessori principle that you can bank on is that behavior has consequence. Good behavior has good consequences, by and large, and bad behavior has bad consequences, by and large. I say by and large because, any of you play cards or board games that have, cards or dice or anything as an element of luck? I play backgammon. Love that game. It's great. A lot of math in backgammon. And backgammon has dice, so a lot of people think it's a game of luck. And I can tell you, by and large, it's not a game of luck. Like a good player will beat a bad player pretty consistently because they know how to move the checkers and use the doubling cue. But that doesn't mean that a ranked novice can beat the world's #1 player in any given game. That'll never happen in chess, but it does happen in backgammon. So I love backgammon because it's a great metaphor for life, because sometimes you do everything right and you get a bad outcome, and it's okay. That's just part of what life is. It doesn't mean that your good behavior was a bad idea. Generally, the consequence follows from and relates directly to the behavior, backgammon notwithstanding. So it's appropriate to match the consequence to the situation. If a child misuses a toy, it makes sense that he loses the opportunity to play with that toy for a certain period of time. If you mistreat it, you won't be able to use it. This toy deserves your respect, because in our home, we respect things and people in our environment. Directly tied to the principle, behavior contradicts the principle, the consequence matches the behavior. If a child's screaming or otherwise misbehaving in a restaurant, in a other public place, it makes sense to leave. Other people didn't come here to hear you screaming. If you continue, we'll be forced to leave now, even though we haven't finished our meals. And then let the child experience the discomfort she feels from the consequences of her behavior. This is a key part of things that don't sometimes happen. Don't offer a replacement toy.
No.
Don't offer him other food.
No.
And you might say, well, I'm going to send my kid to bed hungry. Yeah, send your kid to bed hungry. You know, they're not going to starve to death. They'll wake up in the morning, they'll be hungry and have a healthy breakfast. But they're suffering the consequences of their behavior that are contradicting the principles that they've agreed to. And otherwise, if we don't do this, children are not going to know how the world really works. Now, if the consequence doesn't relate to the behavior, the punishment doesn't fit the crime. So with the toy and the food, the punishment was directly related. It made sense. You lose the use of the toy. We're not going to finish dinner. You could even say that the punishment was kind in that it was loving and appropriate. So here are two examples when the repercussions don't match and they violate the rule of being kind to one another. If you continue to fight, I'll take away your cell phone. If you don't make your bed now, you won't get breakfast. Those consequences have absolutely nothing to do with the behavior. So for a parent, they're inappropriate. They're not kind, they're not respectful. If you keep your rules and consequences clear and appropriate, kids will really appreciate you for it, because they want to know what's expected of them, and you're being consistent with that. Now, saying no, yes, question.
Wait, so what would the consequences for not making your bed be then?
All right, so what could a possibility be for that? Any ideas? So, well, it's a couple of different things. So one, they could sleep on a bed with no sheets.
I've done that.
Yeah, has that worked?
Yeah.
It does. Yeah. I mean, we don't want to be cruel to our kids, but what is a reasonable consequence that fits that? Maybe there's a clean sleeping bag, and it's like, all right, well, they may like that actually, which is okay.
Yeah, no sheets.
And that's not discomfort for them. It's like, oh, fart. That's what my girls would say.
Well, looking at the consequences, it is the direct consequence of the fact they haven't made their bed. In our house, we keep our rooms clean. We respect our environment, and so a possibility there might also be to say, well, your bed's dirty now. We didn't make it. Maybe there were animals jumping on it, or there's bugs crawling around, or whatever it is. There's food crumbs in there, and so the bed's dirty. We keep a clean home, so now you may do the laundry of your bed sheets. And if they don't want to do that, then we can say, well, we have no clean clothes, and we can't take you out to the store because you have no clothes to wear, and so on and so on. So there's definitely consequences that fit the situation no matter what it is. Are there other ones that you can think of? Can you think of any other solutions? And what about other situations? So you're here for me to tell you that, I know. Any other?
Which is hard because, like, my younger daughter at 4 can't really do the laundry well, so that's not gonna help. Maybe my 9-year-old, but
So what about the 4-year-old? So let's go off on this tangent a little bit. So that That's great. So the 4-year-old then is going to learn pretty quickly that, oh, well, these things have to be cleaned, and to be a responsible person to keep our home clean, which we've agreed to as a principle, respect our home. So we do that by doing laundry. Well, you can go and help her do the laundry. And now she's actually learning an important skill. She is going to need help doing that, right? She's not going to be able to do it herself. So, well, this is an opportunity for you to learn what mommy does in doing the laundry. And now you have an opportunity to see why it's so important to make your bed and keep our house clean. This is how we do it. So it's a loving, kind thing. It's not, it's not a punishment. I did say punishment and crime, but it's really not a punishment. This is a loving, caring approach that we're looking to take. So we talked about saying no. We want to be clear, firm, respectful, and most important, non-judgmental. Tone of voice, body language. Why are we getting upset with a 4-year-old who is not doing what we expect him to do? What's the real problem? What's the real, I'll call it a mistake, when a child doesn't do something that we expect her to do? Who can tell me what the mistake is? What was the mistake and who made it? A child doesn't do what we expect them to do. You failed to give instructions properly. Well, that may be a cause of why the child didn't do it. And you can consider that a mistake in not giving instructions. Let's get to the root cause.
Maybe you're expecting more than they're able to do.
Maybe your expectations were incorrect, and it's not maybe. That's truth. If you have expectations and someone, whether it's your child, your spouse, yourself, anyone, doesn't meet those expectations, the only conclusion you can draw is that your expectations were incorrect. Does that make sense? I'm not talking about the root cause. I'm not talking about any emotional reasons behind this or anything else. This is really hard, actually. What's fascinating to me is that when I give this talk and I mention this thing about expectations, let me just ask you, does that resonate with you? Is this something that you thought about? Or is it something that's like, Larry, it's completely obvious, like why are you even spending time on this? Or is it, gosh, I never really thought about it that way. This is a level, what I call level 2 type of thinking, where you remove yourself from the situation and you start thinking about how you're thinking about things. And our goal at ShillerLearning, and my personal goal in life, is to help people and myself experience these higher levels of thinking. So many times there's more than one conversation going on at the same time. There are other people besides myself who are interested in bringing this type of higher level thinking to the general population. And one of them, regardless of how you feel about hedge funds, is a guy named Ray Dalio, who founded Bridgewater Associates, which is the largest hedge fund in the world. And he actually goes out and talks to people about thinking about the actual real conversations that are going on. And he talks about a mental map where you can actually gauge what the conversation is. There's usually an emotional component to a conversation, then there's a factual, rational component to a conversation, and they're really often very different because, as we know, we have feelings and we have behavior, and we have the capacity through our frontal lobes to make those two things different, unlike other animals. So being clear, firm, respectful, non-judgmental. No, you may not have M&Ms for lunch. That's a clear, firm, non-judgmental statement. Versus, how come you're always begging for bad food? All right, so it's a little snarky, it's judgmental, and it's not respectful. Your sister is speaking now. You may wait your turn. Versus, do you see how rude you're being to your sister? So look at the contrast of those two things. And the second is just your emotional response. The first is really having the goal of being respectful and adhering to the principles that you've all agreed to. So you can reflect about which you think will be more effective, but I think the answer is pretty obvious. So when you communicate limits clearly and concisely, and then you take logical action to enforce them, it's a very powerful combination. Another wonderful Montessori approach is to give options. state the limit, then the reason. So it's limit, reason, and then alternative. I cannot let you hit me. My safety is important to me. But if you want to hit something, you may hit this pillow instead. You may not have M&Ms for lunch. We respect our bodies about what we feed it. But if you're looking for something with sugar, we can have an orange for dessert. So whatever situation you come up with, state the limit, state the reason, and then the alternative. It's a very effective framework. So we talked about frontal lobes a little bit. That's where the logical thinking of the brain takes place. These frontal lobes don't fully develop, many scientists agree, until age 26. Age 26? Is anybody under age 26 in this room? Too embarrassed to raise your hand. All right, your frontal lobes aren't fully developed yet. Can you imagine what it's like for a 4-year-old, a 12-year-old, a 16-year-old trying to regulate their behavior? It's hard, which deserves our empathy. We have amygdalae. I looked it up in the dictionary. How do you pronounce this? So we often hear the term amygdala, which means one, but the human brain has 2 amygdalae. So think of that. That's the fight or flight. That's where our emotions, that's where chemicals flood our bloodstream and give us that emotional feeling, usually negative. It's the job of our frontal lobes to take that chemical set of stuff in our bloodstream and consciously decide whether or not we want to react to it and what is appropriate behavior in that moment. If we have time, I'll talk a little bit more about the amygdala. All right, let's look at some situational examples. So the family's taking a stroll in the park. It's a beautiful first warm day of spring, which means a lot if you're from the East Coast like I am. The sun is out, the sky is blue, and Tommy drops his gum wrapper on the grass. You're not happy with Tommy. You should know better. So what do you do? What do you do in that situation? You could ignore it and keep on walking. After all, it's just a gum wrapper. You don't want to ruin this nice day over a gum wrapper. You could say, Tommy, you pick that up right now. You could say, do you think it's a good idea to litter? You could say, I saw that you littered. Is littering consistent with your values? I saw that you dropped the gum wrapper. You may pick up the gum wrapper and put it in the trash. So which of those? Does anyone have a preference for those? I think the last one probably is, the one that's going to have the best results. Clear, firm, consistent, non-judgmental. Let's look at that sentence. I saw, which is like really pretty cool because so many times we think we see something that didn't really happen. So many times, game of telephone, we think we hear something that wasn't actually said. So that little bit of language right there is so powerful. I saw that. I heard this. It wasn't you said this. You did this. You did that. It was what I heard, what I observed. Really important language there because, in fact, maybe he didn't drop the gum wrapper. Maybe it was something on his pants that fell, came loose, a little label, and happened to fall on the ground. So, actually, really, the first thing to do before saying anything is to let the anger subside. So here's what happened. The amygdala went off, this rush of chemicals went through your body, and so the temptation is to respond immediately to that. The nice thing about those chemicals getting into the body is that, well, if you study math, e to the minus x is this curve that starts out high and pretty quickly dips down to asymptotically goes to 0. So the impact of those chemicals on you is like e to the minus x. It starts out high, but very quickly deteriorates. So that old adage, just count to 10, has so much meaning and power because after 10, it's already pretty far down. And then your reaction to it is going to be a lot less. And if you just visualize it that way, non-judgmentally about yourself, about what you're experiencing, it becomes a lot easier to implement. So I think of it as pressing pause. Some people say count to 10. I think of it as pressing pause. I'm going to press pause right now. And it has the same kind of effect. After a couple of minutes, it's like completely gone from your bloodstream, right? All those chemicals that your amygdala put in there. Now, I had the good fortune to meet a gentleman named Satya Goenka, who taught an ancient meditation technique called Vipassana. So I got this invitation in my email to go to this Harvard Business School Club meeting in New York where this meditation specialist was going to talk, and I'm thinking, well, that's kind of odd, like Harvard Business School and all these, very frameworky kind of people, and then there's, business, profit, all that kind of stuff, and then there's this meditation specialist. I got to go to this. This is going to be interesting. So, and he had worked with prisons, maximum security prisons, to go and give talks, and the wardens wanted to lock up the prisoners so he would be safe. They were worried for safety. He says, I won't come if they're not completely free to move around. He said, I'm not showing up. And they negotiated, and he finally set it up that way. And the results were unbelievable. There was a 60 Minutes segment on it, and if you ever get a chance to look up Goenka, Goenka, in 60 Minutes, it could really change the world, what this guy was talking about. He passed away about 5 years ago. But in that talk, there was a little pamphlet, really poorly written, lots of grammar mistakes and spelling mistakes. Must have been translated into 4 languages before English. But I read it, and it was short, so my ADHD didn't get in the way. And I started to assimilate some of the ideas into my daily living and teachings. It's not exactly Montessori, much older, thousands of years old. But I think she would fully approve of what Goenka was talking about with this technique called Vipassana. And what it enabled me to do was, well, here's basically in a nutshell is how it works. What my takeaway from it. So I'm going to give you the Larry Schiller take on Vipassana. It's like, it's a little different. So I have also an IT background in technology. So back in the old days, you had these batch processes that you would do like once a day for payroll, and then you wake up in the morning and this stuff would be all updated, right? That's a batch process. Today we have a lot of real-time processes, especially on our apps. Everything's updated real time. So meditation is something I could never do. Really? You want me to, 45 minutes, assume some yoga poses? Are you kidding me? There's no way that could happen for me. I just don't have the patience for that. So I said, well, I'm looking for an easy way out here. So I said, all right, well, we have batch processes with computers. Isn't that really what yoga or some of these things where you sit for 45 minutes or an hour or 90 minutes and you do that? It's like a batch process of meditation. I said, I wonder if you could do like a real-time meditation. So in other words, every waking moment of my life, I want to be mindful and be meditating. So I'm meditating right now. I'm multitasking. I'm actually meditating as I'm talking to you right here, which it's hard. I have to work really hard at that because I have to be completely mindful and self-aware of what's happening, and at the same time applying the same kind of principles that I might be doing if I were sitting for 45 minutes doing nothing else. That was my takeaway from Vipassana. So I'd said, and the other thing about Vipassana was this non-judgmental aspect that's consistent with Montessori, where whatever our feelings are or anything, we're just a collection of molecules in our body. And so they might interact differently or vibrate differently. And so we can simply look at how our bodies respond to external stimuli. Something happens in the environment, and then normally we might say, "Whoa, that made me angry," or you made me upset," or those are responses that you'll hear people often give. But that's not really what happened. We chose, either through our amygdala or through our frontal lobes, to react a particular way to something that happened in the environment over which we have zero control. So it didn't make us do anything. We are the ones responsible for doing those things. And really, we can see the results of it by physical changes in our body. So if we look inward and see I noticed there's pressure in my stomach, if you're feeling that. Or I noticed that, my face got hot. Non-judgmental terms are simply observing the physical reality of our bodies in response to some external stimuli. And that approach has an amazing effect, because what happens, I tried it, and it was like, oh my gosh, all my stress and pain and frustration or anger or whatever the negative emotion I was feeling just magically melted away and just completely went away. So I said, let me try this. Let me call my mom and talk about some political subject in which I know we disagree. We both get really heated about this. So I deliberately, poor mother, called her up, said, so Mom, how are you? So what do you think about what just happened in the news the other day about this, that, and the other thing? And she really got into it. She's like, boom, boom, boom. And it was exactly the opposite way. I thought about whatever that thing was, which I forget now. And so I'm feeling all these feelings. So I did admit to moving the phone a little bit away from my ear, but then I practiced this mindful, real-time meditation of focusing in on my body and seeing, I noticed that my leg is shaking and my stomach has this pressure and I'm flush all over, and I just focused on that, trying to listen to the conversation at the same time. And all of a sudden, all that negative emotion melted away. I started feeling empathy for my mother, not her point of view, but just the fact that she felt so strongly about something. Isn't that wonderful? And we ended up having a very loving conversation after the whole thing was over. Unbelievable. So then I tried in other situations. I remember I was in, I play violin, and I was in an orchestra, and the musicians felt they were being mistreated, so they called a meeting with management, and it was a very contentious meeting. And I remember they invited me to the meeting as one of the musician representatives, and I remember being in the meeting, and there was a lot of angst and anger, and they asked me to speak a bit, and I spoke in a very calm and respectful voice. And afterwards, and it did end up changing the whole course of the meeting, and I had several people come up to me and commented, it's like, Larry, I don't know how you were able to remain so calm and inject just a sense of reasonableness into the meeting. And it wasn't me, it was my response to Goenka and Vipassana and meditation, people who practice yoga and other forms of meditation. It's my medication, other forms of meditation that help me do this. So if I can do it, it's not hard. And it's consistent in so many ways with what my Montessori learnings have been about, and has resulted in just so much better relationships with anything in my environment, and especially people that I come in contact with. All right, so anger, it generally doesn't have good outcomes when expressing it, and it's a response. It doesn't mean that something or someone else caused it. It's within ourselves. So it makes sense to focus on our body, not our feelings, on our physical body and sensations. And really focus on just what is reality. What a concept. That's that E to the minus X thing again, because the degree to which my feelings dissipated, I was able to observe reality non-judgmental happened pretty quickly. All right. So let's say that we're in sufficient control of ourselves, that we're responding in a calm way. And that's what I mean by pressing pause. So there's a bit of a discussion on that, but it worked so well for me, I wanted to share it with you. So here are some possible responses to bad behavior. And this will form, basis for a video. So, in the first case, Tommy dropped the gum wrapper. Do we ignore it, keep walking, Well, let's go through these responses. Most would agree that ignoring a rules violation, right, or a principle, we treat our environment with respect, it's a bad idea because there's no consequences. What kind of signal is this going to send to our kids? So much for just ignoring it. Anger is not, adult-like, respectful. That nixes number 2. Asking if it's a good idea to litter, it's a little manipulative. Of course it's not a good idea. So let's just get to it. Let's get it for clarity. But I mention it because it is possible that a child may not know that something was done that was not respectful. And so if that's the case, this response can lead to an open, non-judgmental, non-incriminating, non-guilt-producing conversation about principles and how to live with integrity. So this could actually be a possibility. Asking if littering is consistent with your values, it's not unreasonable, it's a bit judgmental. But that said, depending upon the child's age, it could result in a deeper conversation about values and integrity, but the best is to be clear. Stating what you saw, it's a good thing, it observes reality without judgment. Then saying you may pick it up and throw it in the trash provides clear direction without judgment. Now, the question is, okay, great, Larry, but Tommy refused to pick up the gum wrapper. Now what do I do? Didn't make his bed, whatever, you know. So there's consequences. So for this walk and maybe the next walk, Tommy's not allowed to bring gum, food, drink, or anything else that has a wrapper or a container that could become litter. It may mean that you leave the park now. Now, you might be thinking, well, you know, that's not fair. What's that?
Spit the gum out.
Spit the gum out.
Throw it in the trash.
You know, you might say, you know, that's not fair. I came for a nice walk in the park and I'm like gonna ruin my perfectly good day because my son threw a gum wrapper on the grass? Okay, well, wait a minute. Like, who's the adult here? What's more important to you? It gets the question of values. Is getting a walk in the park on the first nice spring day more important than raising principled children who are receiving clear and consistent direction? Because that's really your choice right now. And if you make the choice of, I'm going to ignore it, I want to have a nice day in the park, you're you're modeling behavior that your children will follow, whatever you do.
I totally get that, but sometimes in my family, what has happened, my older daughter it's like not fair to her. And like, let's just say like, maybe this is her birthday and we're out for her choice of her birthday walk in the park. And the older daughter does that. And to make everyone go home, just for the sake of this discipline action of this child, that doesn't value the other child's choice and birthday and, you know what I mean?
Right, yeah, sure, right.
In those situations, like it's just you
My
and
life
the
is
one
so
child,
complicated, isn't
okay.
it?
But
Yeah.
it is, I feel it's it stresses me out, every single little situation, you have to like know what is the good, appropriate consequence.
Yeah.
I would just say you can't enjoy the gum. Take it out of your mouth.
So, yeah, I mean, so tactically, maybe, you know, the gum's got to go to try to come up with a simple solution. It may involve a deeper solution in terms of, well, let's have a conversation, and it's one that you may not be running. In other words, it might be between that I'm just making this up as we're going along, but your older daughter is having a nice birthday, and the younger son who just threw the gum wrapper and disrespected the environment, there's a conflict there. Maybe they could talk it out and say, you know, well, you know, your sister's here to celebrate the birthday. Is that something you'd want her to do in a good way? And are you self-aware that by disrespecting the environment, that is not going to result in a good outcome for her? And in our home, we care about each other. So using those principles, they help to diffuse the situation. And if he's really recalcitrant, there's something else going on. He's ill. You know, who knows, right? It could be a million things. You may have no choice but to leave at that point. But I think before you get to that, there are a whole range of other possibilities that will allow the day to go on in a constructive way. So this modeling of long-term gain versus short-lived sacrifice, it's a big deal, the behavior model. So there's an old joke about the violinist who makes her first trip to New York. She's going to play in Carnegie Hall for the first time. And it's all excited. She sleeps, but she oversleeps. She spends the night out in the city, and she oversleeps. She rushes downstairs, and hops in the first cab or Uber or whatever it is they do now. And she says, quick, what's the fastest way to Carnegie Hall? And there's this old guy in the front seat, very, wise looking, crumpled hair. Turns around very slowly, looks her deeply in the eyes and says, practice, my dear, practice. So that's the fastest way to Carnegie Hall. And that is such a critical thing to do with all these ideas and tips. And you run across something, practice it. And you're going to make mistakes because nobody does things perfectly or even well or even moderately well the first time we try them. So we're going to be making mistakes. So to help you in your process, be transparent with your children. Tell them, I don't know about this. I'm trying something. I heard this lecture and heard this guy Larry Schiller talk, and he suggested this. I'm going to try it because I want us to have a great relationship. When my daughter was 4, she was in a Montessori school, and the teacher said, this is the Princeton Center for Teacher Education. It's a world-renowned teacher training institute for American Montessori Society. The teachers were amazing. Well, Joyce was her teacher. Joyce said, Larry, call me. She says to every student, here's my number, my home number. If you have any questions, any problems, you don't know what to do, call me. So my daughter, Sophia, was doing something that I didn't think was appropriate. I didn't really know how to deal with it. I didn't know how to do it. So I said to Sophia, Sophia, I've never been a dad to a 4-year-old who's behaving this particular way, and I don't know how to respond to you. So, but I want to respond in a good way. I actually had this conversation with her, so she's looking at me. And I said, you know, your teacher, Joyce, said that I could call her if I had a question. I said, would that be okay with you if I called her, got some advice? Would you agree to follow her advice? And we could both follow it together. She said, sure, Dad. I was like, wow, this is pretty cool. So I called Joyce, we had a 20-minute conversation, put her on speakerphone so Sophia could hear it. And after the conversation, Sophia heard everything, and I said, so let's do this. She said, great. And all of a sudden, the whole situation was diffused. I felt like I had a good solution. I wish I could remember the details. I just remember that structure to it. But so don't be afraid to be transparent. Don't be afraid to let your kids know you're trying to do the best you can as a parent and you don't know everything. It's okay, you're gonna make mistakes, but it's because your intentions are good and you want your behavior to follow your intentions. So, you know, you may not get to Carnegie Hall with that practice, but you'll be a great parent. By the way, that was, I don't know if anybody got that reference to Allen Iverson on the previous slide. Does anybody know what that is? It's an hysterical video. Allen Iverson's a basketball player, and they saw him practicing, the news media, they come in for practices and stuff, and he was like lazing off, and you know, he was chilling, he wasn't working hard, and they really questioned him hard about it at the news conference. And he said, it's just practice, man. You know, he goes on for 2 minutes and 30 seconds. You use the word practice about 1,000 times in those 2 minutes. I mean, we're just talking practice. It's practice, man, practice. You know, so he was kind of downplaying it. He said, when I'm in a game, I give it my all. But it's an hysterical video, and it, you know, conventional wisdom, which turns out to be pretty good, is that practice is important. So here, another thing about Montessori, here's a phrase that Montessori practitioners use all the time. I saw you working hard, or something like that. And so let's go through a bunch of phrases here that reinforce what this is all about. So you generally won't hear a Montessori teacher say, good job, or that's beautiful, that artwork, or something like that. They'll say things like, I saw you being very focused and concentrated. Just like I saw you drop that gum wrapper. They'll say, I saw you so focused and concentrated. You drew so carefully. People will enjoy reading your writing. Praising results, not the effort, promotes a fixed mindset. A book by Carol Dweck called Mindset talks about the difference between fixed mindset and growth mindset. Fixed mindset is, oh yeah, I'm gonna get straight A's and everything, and I'm gonna pride myself on not working hard to get them. Well, growth mindset says, I'm gonna work my butt off, I don't care if I get a B-, I wanna understand. If I do, it's an opportunity for me to grow, because there's some things I obviously didn't understand. So in a nutshell, those are the differences between those two mindsets. When you promote results, you're promoting a fixed mindset, don't do it. Praise work. When you praise work, that promotes a growth mindset. A couple more examples. Instead of, oh, you're a good girl, say the reason you think that. I saw you treat your little brother with kindness and empathy when he scraped his knee. And there's no judgment here. There's just observation. Instead of, your artwork is beautiful, say what you observed. I saw you struggle and redo and start again until you got that drawing just the way you wanted it. What do you think is going to have more impact on that child? And the other thing about it is that they know you're putting thought into it. They know you're observing their work. If you just say it's beautiful, it's like, they just say that about everything I do. Now, this whole thing about approval, we talked about truth, valuing truth. Well, why wouldn't you value truth? But a lot of people value everybody. I value my ego. I want to feel good. I want to be right. And when those two things come in conflict, we have to choose what values we really have as people. And for many people, their self-worth depends on the approval of others. That's a really uncontrolled, stressful life. Talk about not being in control. Because we don't have control over whether or not someone's going to approve what we do. No matter how we may want to see it differently, we only have control over what we think, not over what other people think. It feels great to get a compliment, and there's nothing wrong with that. But that's not the reason principled people do things. We do things because we think they're the right thing to do, even if other people don't. We do it because we want to do it, and because we want to make the world a better place by doing it. It's not to win approval. We're not doing it for praise. So we're helping to develop. If we ask the question, what do you think about your work, to a child? We're helping to develop a child's self-awareness and objectivity about themselves and their work. So often missing. You know, when a child asks, do you like my drawing? You know, they're looking for approval. So this is a great opportunity to model the importance of doing things because we love to do them and we're following our passion, not to seek approval of others. So we want to automatically say, yes, I love it, it's great, I admire your passion. And you know what, it's not the end of the world if you say that. But if you follow it up with, what do you think about it? What made you pick the colors that you did? I see lots of square shapes in your drawings. You used to draw with circles. What made you change? Boy, isn't that great? Look at that involvement, self-awareness you're developing in your kids, the independence. Help them develop the ability to evaluate their own work, non-judgmentally. Help them to develop objective self-analysis. What a great thing we can do as parents. I think we're running out of time, but I'll keep going. So just, you know, my watch said it was 11:30, 12:30. So I can stop and break for questions, or I can continue on with the next couple of slides. Just, do we have any, who would like me to keep going? Who would like to ask questions? Who would like me to stop and just you guys move on to your next? You're all very shy. You guys are heading out, all right. So let me open up for Q&A right now, quickly, and then if anyone who wants to stay, I think we have another half hour here. I'll be happy to stay and go through the rest of the slides. So at this point, do we have any, because I'm going to go through specific phrases, situational phrases that are tactical, and hopefully helpful. Okay, so we'll leave the folks who have to go with the opportunity to leave. All right. So here are some other phrases that we can use. Where could you find that? So a lot of kids will come and say, oh, you know, can you help me with this? Can you do this for me? You know, I lost my shirt, you know. So instead of just doing, you know, it's like easier if I just do it. Press pause and actually do a little bit of work to help them build their own capability to solve the problem that they're having trouble with. So, you know, it's the story about the starving man who's looking for fish, and of course we can best help that person by teaching them how to fish. Kids get overwhelmed. So we can rush in and just do the whole thing for them. We can say, oh, just stop that, do something else. Or we can make it manageable. Which part would you like help with? Yep, it's big. We may react stressfully to this project, but it's doable, we can do it. What part can I help with? That's when your child's struggling, they're frustrated, they're in tears, they're overwhelmed. So we resist the instinct to rush in and fix everything. We don't save the day. We take away the overwhelming aspect of the situation. You put away the dolls, I'll put away the furniture. What shapes would you like me to put back? You're in it together. And together you're following the house rules. In our home, we, whatever. There's a great example of this. The Forest Service had a lot of pollution. People were littering all over the place, you know, human pollution. They were littering, there was trash all over the place. They tried a million things to fix the problem. So they put up signs, please don't litter. Didn't work. They put up, you know, a picture of somebody littering with a line through it, a couple of those. Then they said, well, none of these things work. You know, let's try the punitive thing. You get a $500 fine if you litter. That didn't work either. And then they said, well, let's go the rational thing. You know, you respect the environment. Look how long litter lasts. You drop that thing, it's 3-4 years before, you know, some stuff will be there for, you know, 1,000,000 years. Didn't help. It finally worked, and their compliance increased by 50%. They showed a picture of somebody littering and someone else looking at them like, what the heck are you doing? Shame. And it worked. So what does this mean? It means that we belong, and we want to follow the same kind of rules. It's human nature. We have principles in our home. We want to follow them. In our home, this is what we do. In our forest, this is what we do. We don't do that. And that sense of, this applies to our sense of belonging. That's why it worked. The human desire to belong is so strong, and children want to be upstanding members of the community. So good outcomes generally result when we remind them how the community works. That's what this is about. In our home, we do this. Reminds children of the rules and what's good behavior. And like with the forest sign on the bottom right, it results in cooperation and good behavior. In our home, everyone remains at the table until the last person finishes eating. No running in the house. Instead of that, we can say in our home, we walk. Follow the child is another key Montessori principle. Kids have strong wills. They want to do something. They want to do it now. And when that something involves passion and learning, the best results come when parents follow the child. Supporting the focus and concentration that results from when they engage passionately in an activity. When we remove our child from focus and concentration, from play, that's what happens in public schools every day. The bell rings 45 minutes. You wonder why there's so much, ADHD. Because we're moving kids, we're training them not to have focus and concentration. They flip from one thing to the next. And the technology that's available supports that lack of focus. Every child has different learning styles. They learn at different times and at different paces. And they each have their own unique passions. And that's what we want to cultivate as parents. So following the child simply means let that passion flower in that individual child. It means to ignore what you think your child should be doing, and instead letting your child do what she wants to be doing. Assuming, of course, it's developmentally appropriate, it's safe, and it's approached with focus and concentration. Your child isn't reading by age 4, that's okay. She's probably doing something else that only other 6-year-olds are doing. Compare your child not against his peers, but against his own potential. That's the only competition that's worthwhile. Now there are some creative approaches. So these are some patterns. Success in life comes from, one way to success in life is by recognizing patterns and recognizing the importance of patterns. So here are several patterns: choice, partnership, mastery, contribution, playful, fantasy that you can use. So, partnership, the baby's sleeping, your piano playing will wake him. What should we do? Partnership, we're gonna work on this together. Can you read all this? I don't want to repeat everything. That's okay. Fantasy is great. They want chocolate.
The thought before this, can you expand a little bit on how to compare your child not against other children, but against their own potential?
Yes. Sure. So we're subject to all these norms about what we should, there comes should again, should be doing as parents, what our child should know by age 5, 6, 7. We have grade levels. Grade levels are an artifact of a lazy bureaucracy. Why do we have grade levels? Doesn't make any sense. So grade levels, you put everybody in the same group, and then we have competition in that group against our peers. Needless, unnecessary, bad outcomes, terrible idea. So instead, if we just look at a child's individual interests, because every child's different, they have different passions, and we're providing an environment, a respectful environment for them to pursue their passions, and we're giving them a framework of principles to follow, helping them build the abilities that let them learn knowledge that supports their passion. That's the framework. And by following the child, we're giving them the ability to reach their full potential. Does that help? So we have these creative approaches, and I have some other examples I'll briefly mention. The old way, we do things in the Montessori way. So the old way might be to say things like, be careful. You'll never hear a Montessori parent say, be careful. What do they say instead? What's a good thing to think about when crossing the street? Now, I'm not talking about exigent circumstances where there's immediate danger. That is an appropriate time to raise your voice, take action, physical if necessary, to prevent harm. I'm not talking about those types of situations. Stop being so loud. You may talk softly in our home. We speak softly. Or, it's loud and I need my peace and quiet. It's that framework. Or, you may go outside. I've asked you several times, just do it now. Partnership. Would you like to do it yourself or have me help you? We're late, get those shoes on. Would you like to put your shoes on yourself or would you like some help? So, no, you can't have that. I'm not willing to buy that now, but maybe we can add that to your birthday list. So these are a number of phrases that, as parents, we might be tempted to react partially without respect, just through our amygdala. But here are Montessori phrases that help us maintain that sense of calm and respect, that our children will model back to us sooner than we will ever know. I have a whole bunch of other ones here. We can make this available. The sign-up sheet, hopefully that you guys were able to fill out, as we have your email, so we can provide you with further information on these situational examples that are here. And let's see, quickly go through these. Use the brain and all the senses. We talk about multisensory education. Different nerve endings. There's visual and auditory we're all familiar with, but the neurons in the fingertips are that's tactile, very, very different than kinesthetic neurons, which are the neurons in the muscles of the big body groups, the thighs, the abs, and the shoulders. So a curriculum that has tactile doesn't necessarily have kinesthetic. Manipulatives by themselves are generally tactile. Montessori manipulatives involve kinesthetic activity as well. They're hugely different, reach completely different parts of the brain. So it's important to avoid curricula that use one primary manipulative, because it's typically only going to reach one or two learning styles, and when the child gets tired of that manipulative, basically you have to throw out the curriculum. And finally, I've got some resources here that you're welcome to jot down. MontessoriNotebook.com, theMontessoriNotebook.com. Articles of how-to tips, ageofmontessori.org, and mariamontessori.com. If you really want to study Montessori, the last website gives an overview of the different periods stages that Montessori has identified. The first two are more tactical and practical in terms of how-to tips and articles. And you'll see a lot of consistent work with what you've learned today. Thank you for staying to the bitter end over here.
Thank you.
And we're at booth 800 if you'd like to learn more about how we actually implement Montessori. Thanks.